It's the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, David.
Good morning.
And we have the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hello, everybody.
Our first guest will be Dr. Susan Lin, one of the world's leading experts on the impact of big tech and big business on children. In her new book, Who's Raising the Kids?, Dr. Lin explores the influence of tech-enabled marketing on our culture, how it molds our values and attitudes, shapes how we conceptualize ourselves and others, motivates us to act, and guides our choices. We'll speak to her about how new tech has allowed marketers to access children in insidious ways, the toxic effects of commercialism, and how we can make things better. In the second half of the program, we're going to welcome back Robert Weissman, the president of Public Citizen, who, among the many things that organization does, full disclosure, I'm on the board, they have been at the forefront of protecting the United States Post Office. Rob is going to fill us in on Public Citizen's efforts to encourage the Biden administration to fire the Trump-appointed Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, who, in the interest of so-called efficiency, has been slowly dismantling and privatizing this constitutionally protected institution. The Post Office plays a particularly important role in our democracy, especially in these pandemic times when mail-in voting has become so necessary. As always, somewhere in the middle, we'll check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, let's find out who's raising our kids. David?
Dr. Susan Lin is an author, psychologist, and award-winning ventriloquist. She was the founding director of Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood, and she is a world-renowned expert on creative play and the impact of media and commercial marketing on children. Her latest book is Who's Raising the Kids? Big Tech, Big Business, and the Lives of Children. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Dr. Susan Lin.
Well, I'm so happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Welcome indeed. This is a subject close to our work over the years, Susan, and it's great to have this magnificent book come out now when there's so much discussion from the Federal Trade Commission to the California legislature and other reports on the exploitation of children by the internet giants, among other corporations that are huckstering their way radically around parental guidance and control and direct marketing to children hour after hour after hour. So let's ask the first and most obvious question. Who's raising the kids?
Well, I think one thing that sometimes we forget is that parents have never been the only ones raising children, and that children are affected not just by their families, but also by their communities and also by the larger forces in society. And the problem today is so much of society is controlled by corporations, and that directly affects children's lives in so many ways. In my book, what I was really focusing on was mostly big tech, but also other corporations and how they manipulate children for profit, and why that's just so toxic for kids, for families, and actually for the greater society.
What's interesting about your book is that you have a very, very refined sense of the benefits of raising children in reality and not virtual reality and Facebook's metaverse. I was pretty taken by a list you have on page 210, where you say 6 principles of child development to help adults make decisions about introducing tech to young children. And it's just right on. It's the way traditional families at their best raise their children. One is young children live and learn in the context of social relationships. That's real time. Another is young children use their whole bodies and all their senses to learn about the world, real world. Third is young children learn best and benefit most from direct, first-hand experience in the world of actual relationships and objects. Fourth is young children are active learners who learn by inventing ideas. And 5, young children build inner resilience and coping skills through play. Everything these corporations seem to be aiming at is to undermine those experiences, right, and to seduce and addict the children into the internet gulag. Your comments.
Yeah, first of all, I need to thank Dr. Nancy Carlson Page. I modified her principles and used them in the book. And the digitized, overly commercialized culture that children wake up to every day undermines every single one of those principles, starting from relationships. And one of the things that is troubling me the most today is that the new technologies, the people who own them and make them, are coming between parents and children. And I don't think they're doing it to purposely destroy families. I think of them more as amoral than immoral. I don't know if you would agree with that, but it's just that they're not thinking about that. What they're thinking about is grabbing children's attentions, getting them in front of screens or in front of, these tech toys as much as possible and for as long as possible. And one way they do that is to market their products as being beneficial to parents and to children. They market them as educational for children, at least to adults. That's how they market them. And they give parents the sense that these products are going to make their lives easier. But what they're really doing is taking over what should be the purview of parents and teachers, and people who really know and care deeply about children, not just about, exploiting children for profit. I mean, like, I write a fair amount in the book about Amazon's Alexa for kids. And it's advertised as being able to help kids with homework. But one of the things that I have a chapter in the book that's called Bias for Sale, and it's about the racism embedded in commercial culture. And as I was writing it, I read Sophia Nobel's book, Algorithms of Oppression, which is about the racism embedded in search engines. And her journey began when she typed Black girls into a Google search and came up with pornography, which is not what she came up with when she typed white girls. So I had bought an Echo Dot for kids, which, by the way, is just cute as hell. I mean, it's so cute that when I opened it, I actually went, it's this little tiger. And, we're wired to respond to cuteness. I mean, that's part of the marketing. So I had it down on my kitchen table and I went downstairs and I decided to try to replicate Sophia Nobel's question. So I said to this little Echo Dot tiger, I said, Alexa, what are African American girls? And Alexa responded, African American girls are the fastest growing portion of the juvenile justice system. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I kept asking it over and over and over again. And then I asked, Alexa, what are African American boys? And it said, it was a little garbled, but it basically said there were many boys, they were African American, and many of them had trouble with learning and reading. So Alexa, marketed as, helping kids with homework, was telling the child I was pretending to be that African American children were both bad and stupid. And it's just enraging that at a time when books are being banned, teachers and librarians are being silenced and can't talk to kids about important things, that the tech companies are, pretty much unregulated and can say basically anything they want to children.
Well, that's what I call the arrogance of the algorithms.
Yes.
And I must take issue with you when you said you don't think this is a deliberate design to undermine the family.
I didn't say that, though. I didn't say.
Oh, go ahead. Say what you said.
Okay, I said I think it's absolutely deliberate design. And,
Okay.
And there's a name for it. It's persuasive design. It's, it's based on behavioral psychology, and it's designed to get people to do whatever the people making the products want them to do.
I thought I heard you say that they were amoral.
I think that they don't think about the consequences of what they're doing.
Okay, that's where I take issue. Because the executives in Silicon Valley restrict their own children.
and they don't care about anybody else's children.
Yeah, the corporate model with the parents of the children they want to sell to directly is a zero-sum model. They have to reduce parental involvement and control when they direct market $500 billion of products and services to children every year. Now, if you go to Madison Avenue's language over the years, it goes back a long time. They use words like the corporate parent. They use words like this ad has a, quote, high nag factor, end quote, of their mother or father. So they know exactly what they're doing, just the way the tobacco industry knew what they were doing when they handed out free cigarettes to middle school students leaving school in the afternoon, because they could hook them early, they hook them for life. That's what I meant when I said I take issue with you. Your reaction.
No, I agree with you. I think we basically agree. I think amoral is pretty terrible. And, I'll go with immoral as well. Absolutely.
I don't want to give the listeners the impression that this is anything but a tough book. This is a really tough book, and it's detailed, and it names proper names of business leaders and corporations and products. And it is in the old muckraking style, very well documented.
Well, thank you. It was quite a journey writing this book.
Well, I think it raised eyebrows because, at least here in Washington, we're not used to books like that from academics, much less people who teach at Harvard Medical School, which raises an interesting issue in your book. My sister, Lauren Nader, has taught anthropology for about 60 years at Berkeley. And a few years ago, she made a comment to me. She said, all these books that are coming out from academic people, good critiques of society, do not tap in to the reports, experiences, and studies of actual citizen groups on the ground. For example, and correct me if I'm mistaken, the Center for Science and Public Interest has been documenting the food industry, the junk food industry, exploiting of kids mercilessly, fat, sugar, salt, which you point out, but you don't tap into their materials. Do you find that academics are not close enough to citizen groups on the ground who are really putting out very good reports? They get material from litigation, subpoenas, depositions, testimony. I thought that kind of collaboration would strengthen whatever forces you want to put in motion. Your reaction?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And well, first of all, I think of myself more as an activist really than an academic. And, I do help psychiatry residents, learn how to use puppets to work with children. And this book is filled with research. Everything is documented. I mean, that's really true. But, I founded Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood, which is now called Fair Play. I founded that 22 years ago, some colleagues and I, and we did it because we really felt that advertising and marketing to children is a social justice issue and that it needed an activist organization. So I agree with you that academics, their hands don't get as deep into the real world or the citizen activism that it really should. And one thing that really annoys me about research on children and technology is that they often do studies where they have an intervention that's some kind of tech intervention, and it shows that it's beneficial, say, in the research, but they compare it to no intervention, and they don't compare it to an intervention that has nothing to do with either commercialism or technology. So I think that there is a problem with the academic research. I mean, I think a report recently came out about the metaverse and the possibilities for education in the metaverse. And it was written by very respected academics. And they never said anything about the fact that everything that's going to go on in the metaverse or is already going on in the metaverse is owned by corporations. They never talk about that. And they don't talk about what the consequences are going to be of immersing kids in this incredibly compelling world that is completely dominated by corporate interests.
We're talking with Susan Lin, the author of the brand new book, Who's Raising the Kids? Big Tech, Big Business, and the Lives of Children, published by the New Press. And you're right, the group you founded, the Commercial Free Childhood, is a very active group. One paragraph on page 240 really jumped out, and I just want to read it to the listeners and get your comment. You say, "But I do know that the children of today living as adults in this future world will be much better off if we provide them with opportunities that nurture and bring to fruition qualities like curiosity, empathy, kindness, creativity, critical thinking, and compassion. If they learn to see through and resist the false promises and environmental harms of marketing-induced consumption, if they can recognize the important differences between the real world and what Mark Zuckerberg has now branded the metaverse, none of these qualities or skills can be taught or inspired by corporations looking to exploit kids for profit," end quote. That reminds me, I have to say, of my sister Claire Nader's new book called You Are Your Own Best Teacher, addressed to tweens. And I just want to ask your reaction to just what does Zuckerberg plan when he talks about the metaverse in contrast to the internet? Is it a deeper gulag? A lot of people don't know how to define his vision, grim vision, I would say, of the metaverse. Can you help them out?
Yes, the metaverse the technology is evolving, and it's getting increasingly realistic visually and increasingly compelling. And that's what's happening, with the technology. And I think that Mark Zuckerberg's, vision is that, he and his company, Meta, are going to make a huge amount of money by immersing people in this world that is going to be so compelling that they aren't going to want to leave it. And that's so scary. It's just so scary that the combination of this incredibly compelling and sophisticated and seductive technology and unregulated capitalism, that's just it is already terrible for children, and it's going to get even more terrible. And one of the things that I think it's important for people to remember is that commercialism, or advertising and marketing, which is what all these devices we love so much, that's what they were basically made for, that it doesn't just sell products, it sells values and behaviors. And the values of commercial culture, me first, materialism, image is more important than anything else. Those values are so harmful to society. And especially now, we just had these horrible hurricane in Florida and the one in Puerto Rico. And we know that global warming is real. And we know that one thing that contributes to it is consumption. And we are immersing kids in a world where the most important value, the most powerful value that they're being taught every day is that it's the things they buy that will make them happy.
And as you know, from your own profession, it doesn't make them happy. It increases fear, anxiety, dread, self-hate, the cosmetic industry, for example, defining beauty, all of those things. When a person steps back and look at how these giant corporations, immunized as they are by their corporate law firms, unsupervised by Congress and the state legislatures, are planning, it's nonstop. It's 24/7 strategic planning of a corporate childhood, as you put it. And this amounts to nothing more than tempting, seducing, and addicting these children into the internet gulag and abducting them from their own parents 5 to 7 hours a day. And who knows what the rest of the day is like as a result.
And the other thing is that the industry likes to put it all on parents. Parents should just say, no, it's up to parents. That's the underlying message of these tech people who, protect their own children. Bill Gates didn't get a smartphone for his child until the child was 14. Steve Jobs didn't let his kids play with an iPad. So one of the messages is, you just have to be a good parent. You're not a good enough parent. When clearly, even families where there are two-parent families that have enough money and they're not struggling financially, they have time, they have resources, they're struggling now. Their kids are struggling now. But for kids from low-income families, single parents, parents so stressed about by unemployment or working serial jobs, I mean, those families are hit even harder. Kids from low-income families spend 2 hours a day more with screens than their middle class and upper middle class peers.
If our listeners have children in those age brackets, 9 to 12 or 8 or 13 or 15, when should they respond affirmatively to a child's demand for a cell phone?
Well, first of all, the commercialization of children's lives begins in infancy, even prenatally, it begins. I mean, a long time ago, there was a Dr. Seuss book that you were supposed to read to kids in utero. I mean, Dr. Seuss wrote some wonderful books, but the idea of branding babies before they're even born, I mean, that was just pretty amazing. So it begins in infancy. And basically, there's no benefit. The new technologies, including electronic toys, we can't just talk about screens anymore, but electronic toys that chirp and beep and dance and do backflips all by themselves, they have no benefit. They don't benefit children at all. They don't benefit babies and toddlers. And they deprive kids of the second principle that I talked about, which is exploring the world with all of their senses. So it begins in infancy, and it's really better not to keep young children away from screens. Now, that's complicated because people always say, well, what about video chatting? And that is the one exception, video chatting with adults who are far away, who love them. That is of benefit to children and families. I mean, it is. But the huge ed tech industry and the huge app industry for preschoolers, infants, and toddlers does primarily undermine children's normal, for neurotypical kids, children's normal, healthy development. And what it also does is bind them to the screens where they learn not how to soothe and amuse themselves, or not to turn to other people for that, but to turn to a screen for soothing and amusing. And so in a way, they're being taught to fall in love with these devices.
Some people would call it addiction. You
Yes.
know, every major religion in the world thousands of years ago warned their adherents not to give too much power to the merchant class, because the commercial motive is relentless, all-encompassing. It will destroy or co-opt other civic values that are far more important for society to sustain. And I say this because what these corporations are doing, they are the fundamental radical extremists in our society. They're not recognizing the most important functional traditions. I use the word functional traditions that come out of civil society, religious practices, and other sources of social nurturing and cohesion at their best. We haven't reached that point of condemnation yet.
No. And it's even, I think, more than that, that they co-opt civil society and the spiritual world as well. I mean, churches and synagogues and mosques and temples are encouraged to brand. I mean, so, it's all about branding, and nonprofits are encouraged to brand. And not only that, one way that nonprofits are co-opted is by the lure of corporate funding. I mean, philanthropy is a terrible way to run a world anyway, but when nonprofits that are supposedly dealing with harms like childhood obesity, certainly linked to junk food and junk food advertising, when those nonprofits take corporate funding, say from the food industry or the sugar industry or whatever, or when dietitians take corporate funding you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you, and you may think you're going to be independent, but you're not. And one of the things that I'm so proud of is that even today, I left Fair Play, I guess in 2015. And even today, Fair Play does not take any corporate funding. And there aren't a lot of nonprofits that can say that. There are a few, and there are some, and I list them in my book. But
I wanted to say to the listeners, you list almost 24 civic groups that are right on. They're trying to battle this commercialization of childhood and undermining parental control and guidance. And they're all listed at the end of your book with a little description of each one. Fair Play, Screen Time Action Network at Fair Play, that's an extension. You have Screen Free Week, Five Rights Foundation, Accountable Tech, Alana Institute, Algorithmic Justice League, Backyard Base Camp, Center for Digital Democracy, I've known that for years,
yes.
Center for Humane Democracy, Children in Media Australia, Children in Nature Network. You have Foolproof Foundation, Defending the Early Years. Michelle Singletary, the syndicated consumer columnist for the Washington Post, had a column a while back asking the question, why do 2-year-olds need credit cards? They're
Right.
pushing credit cards on 2-year-olds.
Yes.
Why? Because it's important to establish your credit rating and your credit score at an early age. I mean, there's no limit to commercialism. That's why it's so dangerous. There's no limit to profit.
And not only that, and one of the most worrisome pieces of this is the commercialization of schools and what's taught in schools. And I do have a couple of chapters on that. And one of the things that I did do is take a look and actually play or work with the credit card companies teaching materials on managing money, which is just so absurd. If it wasn't so dangerous, it would be funny. I mean, credit card companies, as you know, benefit when people don't manage their money well. That's kind of the point of them. That's how they make their money, is the huge interest rates. And yet here they are pretending to teach kids financial literacy. I mean, that's ridiculous. And that's why, I included the Foolproof Foundation, which does not take any corporate money and does work with children to help them learn how to manage money. I think that's really important. Share, Save, Spend, I think, is another organization that I list in my book.
Yes, there's something for everybody. These are often organizations that have different emphasis, but they all have a similar goal of freeing children to be children, to have a childhood free, as you say, of commercial exploitation. Now, the other side would say, but the internet opens up a great world. They can learn geography. They can learn how to become marine biologists by logging into places under the sea. They can actually enter a 3-dimensional world where they can climb Mount Everest from their bedroom. What do you say to all that?
Well, I think I mentioned that report about the metaverse, and that's, it talked about how amazing it would be for children to be able to, actually experience the prehistoric world. Well, as I said, what they don't talk about is who's sponsoring that prehistoric world, who owns the prehistoric world, and how does that affect what they're teaching kids and how they're teaching them. And I think that for older children, it's possible for screens to have some educational value. For young children, I don't think there's much. For older kids, it's possible, but the problem is the technology is so powerful and the business models are so destructive and so harmful. And it's that combination. And people often ask me or accuse me of being tech phobic. And I have to laugh about that. I mean, I worked in television. As you know, I began life as a ventriloquist and I performed for kids. I worked with Fred Rogers on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I see the potential, but the potential is being undermined and distorted and exploited by corporate business models that value profit over everything else.
And
So,
also, there's another downside, is that the more screen time they use, apart from all the nasty exchanges and the peer group stuff that comes in and the anonymous hate stuff, let's assume these children are using it to educate themselves. Of course, during the pandemic, the internet people said, see, I mean, they could stay at home and not get caught with the virus and still do their courses. But my impression is that one of the downsides is they read less. Years ago, you'd give a book to an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, and it would be graciously received as if, oh, my, thank you. Now it's like, do I have to carry this? I found in our circle that even when the kids have a reason to read an adult's book, they're part of a family or relatives or close friends in the neighborhood, they're far less likely to do that now. They've become illiterate. They know how to read, but they don't read. So that's another downside, because there's no substitute for picking up a book and reading it compared to entering screen time hour after hour during the day, because you're never let alone by the perpetrators, the penetrators, when you're on the screen, the clutter, the interference, the ads. You're never let alone. If you have a book in your lap, you're let alone. So there's a solitude that is destroyed here.
right.
Your reaction?
Yeah, and books are written to capture attention. I mean, that's certainly true. But the words don't jump off the page and dance and sing and distract you and suck you in. I mean, the book is so much more a marriage between the reader and the author, that the reader brings something to the book as well as the author. But one thing I write about is that the tech industry is trying to convince parents that ebooks are great for kids and young kids, and you should read ebooks to children. But what the research is showing is that the ebooks that have all of these movable things and little birds that tweet and all that they don't engender the kind of dialogue that promotes literacy or promotes deep thinking, that the dialogue between parents and children looking at an ebook that's augmented.
Your part on commercializing education is really superb. You should not just get this book, Who's Raising the Kids? This is one of the most fundamental questions of our era. I mean, the planet is running out of time. If these kids continue to be lobotomized and commercialized and indentured to commercial manipulation, what are they going to be facing when they're adults and have to take over the world as adults? I mean, what kind of leadership are we generating here? This is extremely serious.
I'm not without hope. And the book isn't, I mean, there's a lot of really upsetting things in the book, but also it does talk about the activism that has made changes and that is working to make changes, the importance of that. And in a funny way, when there's so much about the world right now that is so horrible, in a way, the activists and the advocates that I talk to are more hopeful about making change and possibly getting some tech company regulation than,
that leads me to suggest to our listeners that this book by Susan Lin, Who's Raising the Kids, is perfect for family discussion. You create a special family book club and you read this book together. It can be understood by children as young as 10, 11, 12, and the specifics will be understood because they experience them. She has so many examples of the things they experience when they open that cell phone and get into the internet. So Who's Raising the Kids is more than a book for an individual to read. It's a book for family conversation. One can exaggerate a bit by saying all justice movements start with family conversations. When you look at the great leaders of social justice over the last 2 centuries in our country, and they're asked by their biographers or whoever interviews them, how did you become a social justice leader? Well, it often comes back to their parents and what they talked about at home and where their parents took them to marches and rallies and gatherings where these issues were discussed. So this is a book, Who's Raising the Kids by Susan Lin. It's a discussion family book, not just an individual. It's a book to give to your local library for their reading circles. It's a book for some of the thousands of neighborhood book clubs to drop their ridiculous rule that they will not discuss any nonfiction book, only fiction books. They don't want controversy. To become more mature and pick up a book like this. Otherwise, the entire planet will be fictionalized into something called the metaverse or whatever follows it on its way to Neptune.
I just don't want people to be discouraged and give up, because that's what the corporations want. And they want the sense that they are inevitable, right? I mean,
and they're expert at wearing you down,
and
not
they're
just in
expert at
court.
wearing you down. And that's why I talk about stamina. I agree with you that, we are in a crisis. Things need to happen quickly, and they should have happened, years ago or decades ago. I just don't want people to get discouraged and give up if it doesn't happen right away.
That's right. And that's why we have to have a fighting spirit. David, Steve, you want to pitch in here?
Yes, Susan, you mentioned you worked with Fred Rogers and were on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. How savvy was he to the corporate and commercialization of childhood? And what did you learn from him?
What was incredible about Fred Rogers is that he really did put children first. I first saw his show when I was 19, and I was starting out in my ventriloquism career. And he was doing what I wanted to do, basically using the medium of television really to help children. The show was completely for children. And that was at a cost to its popularity, because parents didn't like it so much. A lot of parents didn't like it. It was too slow. It was absolutely focused on young children. And I think that one thing that show helped me do is try to live my life that way. I mean, and my performances for children. And, I made videotapes about difficult issues for kids, some of them with his company, and really just to focus on children and what they need. That was extraordinary in television. It's funny about that show because, parents complained, it wasn't hip. It wasn't hip. It looked like a 1950s show. But if you really dive into what he did shows on greed. He did shows on war. I mean, he actually did shows on war for children and really, took on huge social issues. Whether he would see it as the problems of corporations the way that Ralph and I do, I don't know. We never had that conversation.
David?
Yes, thank you. Circling back to the family, I know parents who have said to me, I can't get my kids to stop playing video games. And I say, throw out the game box. And the parents say, well, then I can't play. So how do we get parents, adults, to realize how dangerous social media is for themselves? Don't they have to see the damage it's doing to them to get them off social media before they realize they have to get their kids off it?
I think that what they need to learn is that children model themselves after us, after their parents. And, what the phrase is, we are our child's first teacher. So, it's true. The more that we use technology, the more likely that our kids are going to use it as well. And one of the really troubling things is there's research showing that when parents are immersed in a screen, like at a playground when their kids are playing, They don't respond to their kids calling them. It's like you don't even hear it. And when they do respond, they're more likely to respond with irritation. And the same is true for kids as well when they're immersed in it. But I think that it's easier to see the problems for other people than to see them for ourselves. It's like the third person thing. And so in some ways, it's easier for parents to see the problems for their kids than it is to see it for themselves. Oh, I can handle social media. I'm an adult, but, I know that it's bad for my kids. But then we're in a situation where, a child's social life may be so tied up with screens that it just gets more complicated. And that's why I think that we really need to start prenatally, before parents even have kids, to talk about the realities of what's going on and the harms. It needs to start from birth. And it's easier to give than it is to take away. But it's true, if you have a child who is on social media, to the exclusion of everything else, I mean, you, your family, and the child have a big problem.
It separates them from the realities they have to confront as they grow older. It separates them from family, community, nature. That's why I call it the internet gulag of virtual reality. Do you have a website you want to give fair play or something?
Well, my website is susanlin.net, and Fair Play's website is fairplayforkids.org.
We've been talking with Susan Linn. Her last name is spelled Linn. She is described on the jacket of this book as a psychologist, award-winning ventriloquist, and a world-renowned expert on creative play and the impact of media and commercial marketing on children. One of her prior books, Consuming Kids, shows that she's been at this for a long time, and thank goodness for that, Susan Linn.
Thank you so much, Ralph, and thanks for so much that you do.
We've been speaking with Dr. Susan Linn. We will link to her book, Who's Raising the Kids? Up next, Robert Weissman, a public citizen, is going to tell us about his efforts to sick the dogs on a certain mailman. But first, let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, October 7, 2022. I'm Russell Mokhiber. Kim Kardashian will pay $1.26 million to settle charges brought by the Securities and Exchange Commission that she touted on social media a crypto asset security offered and sold by Ethereum Max without disclosing the payment she received for the promotion. Kardashian was represented by Patrick Gibbs of Cooley in San Francisco. The SEC alleged that Kardashian failed to disclose that she was paid $250,000 to publish a post on her Instagram account about EMAX tokens, the crypto asset security being offered by Ethereum Max. Kardashian's post contained a link to the Ethereum Max website, which provided instructions for potential investors to purchase EMAX tokens. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman and Ralph. We've asked this question before. Why does Trump-appointed postmaster Louis DeJoy still have a job? Well, our next guest trying to get him fired. David?
Robert Weissman is a staunch public interest advocate and activist, as well as an expert on a wide variety of issues, ranging from corporate accountability and government transparency to trade and globalization to economic and regulatory policy. As the president of Public Citizen, Weissman has spearheaded the effort to loosen the chokehold corporations and the wealthy have over our democracy. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Robert Weissman.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Welcome back indeed, Robert. Who was and is Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, and why do you want him fired?
Well, he is the Postmaster General of the United States, which, as you know, is the person in charge of the U.S. Postal Service. Probably his main qualification for that job as a Trump appointee was that he was a Trump political contributor. His other sort of so-called qualification for the job is he was in the private business of shipping. So, Ralph, as you know, the tradition of the post office, the Postmaster General, comes from within the Postal Service. But Trump appointed somebody who came from a competitor industry and also does business with the Postal Service to take over. As best anyone can tell, he seems to view his mission as head of the Postal Service to be destroying the Postal Service. And he's gone about doing that pretty aggressively in terms of both trying to really hollow out the whole service. He wants to raise postal rates, diminish the quality of service, slow delivery time, slash the staff, and reduce the quality of life for the workers there. That's a pretty good package for undermining the business of the enterprise of the Postal Service altogether. You know, if you're a private equity person, you might come into a corporation and slash it and then resell it and sort of make some money in the process. But if you're running the Postal Service, given the unique nature of what it is, and it's essentially public character, the more you cut it, the more you weaken it. You can't cut it down to save it. You have to expand it and make it more robust. Its significance in American history, and its future depends on it being a network that connects all of us and does so efficiently. So the more you reduce it, the less chance it has to be relevant in the lives of Americans. So,
as Chris Shaw said in his new book on the Postal Service, First Class, there are a lot of opportunities to expand the Postal Service, not just allow them to ship certain products that are prohibited them from shipping and left for the private competitors to do, like FedEx and UPS. And as you were saying, why is he still there a year and 9 months of a Democratic administration? What's the Board of Governors situation all about?
right, so there's no good answer to that. President Biden cannot directly fire the Postmaster General. He's accountable to a Board of Governors, but the president does appoint the members of the Board of Governors over a staggered set of time. There has not yet been a majority on the board to fire DeJoy because of poor prior appointments from Biden. There are 2 new positions that are going to come open, however, in December. And if Biden makes appropriate appointments then there would be a majority that could finally get DeJoy off the board. And we and many others are calling on the president and the administration and pressuring them to make sure that happens.
Tell us about your coalition of over 80 groups all over the country demanding that he be fired.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So there are 80 groups and there are other coalitions, so probably even more, including, some really excellent unions representing the workers at the Postal Service now. This has historically been a niche issue, Ralph, which you've been involved in for so many decades. It's really now garnered the attention of a wide variety of advocacy organizations for many reasons. I mean, thinking first, you have an increasing number of democracy groups that see the Postal Service as essential to making sure that mail-in ballots are delivered in a timely way. Now, we sued the Postal Service and we got commitments that we think are pretty ironclad over the next 6 or so years to make sure they do that. But you need a functioning Postal Service to be able to do that. And that's been one thing that's expanded the set of people interested. I think civil rights organizations have increasingly seen how important the Postal Service is as an avenue of opportunity for historically Black and also other people of color to get good jobs and raise and support families. And people are starting to see also the possibility, as you're saying, of the Postal Service expanding to provide new kinds of services, especially banking services, to compete with predatory lending agencies or banks that are redlining or blocking out lower income communities. And so that's brought in a whole range of other organizations that are interested in, just a kind of core consumer and financial issues for people across the country. And then last, as maybe the coalition has expanded, has been the growing understanding that the Postal Service necessarily has a big footprint in society. It has a big energy footprint in society and can either be part of the solution of transitioning us to a renewable future or an obstacle. So there's been a big fight over the next round of Postal Service vehicles. DeJoy wanted to rely almost not at all on electric vehicles. Under pressure, the Postal Service is going to make a big buy of electric vehicles, but really they should commit from here on out to only buying electric vehicles. Anyway, those sets of factors have really enabled us to pull together a big coalition, and everybody's united around the problem of Louis DeJoy and getting him out of office.
And it has such a big reach. There are about 30,000 post offices and branches in the United States for emergency purposes and delivering of medicines in emergency situations. There's no comparison with any other distribution system. What do you think the prospect in Congress is? I mean, Congress really can change the situation here. Give us your read on where the House and Senate are and where the 2 parties.
Well, as you know, Congress really created a huge problem at the Postal Service by legislatively requiring the Postal Service to pre-fund its pension and retiree health benefits going forward decades, something that no business would ever do. And that made it appear that the Postal Service was in a far worse financial crisis than it actually was. Congress just undid that, which was a major step forward to stabilizing the Postal Service. So we have seen some progress. And I think particularly as DeJoy seemed out to sabotage the 2020 election, a lot of Democrats at least really started to focus in on the threat that he posed. So Congress has been somewhat helpful in a way that hasn't been the case over previous years and decades. But for sure, there's a lot more to do. But the decision-making authority right now really rests with the president. These next 2 appointments are going to be key to decide whether DeJoy stays on as Postmaster General And whether he stays on or is replaced by someone who's got a much bigger commitment to the actual functioning of the Postal Service, I think is going to be decisive for the future of USPS.
Well, it should be an election campaign issue as well. I mean, the Democrats are rather weak in rural areas, but rural areas want to preserve the post office as it is now and improve it, not corporatize it or undermine it the way the Republicans are leaning. So it could be a good point of advantage in appealing to rural and farm areas in our country where the post office is a gathering place. It's a meeting place. It's an exchange of intangible conversations in addition to tapping into all kinds of federal services and pamphlets and using it to ship letters and packages. Do you see any of that coming around? I mean, anybody talking it up on the hustings?
Well, it actually did happen. Again, sort of DeJoy is a flashpoint, both in terms of the functioning of the 2020 election and also just the functioning of the Postal Service for the reasons you said. It did become a significant social and political issue in the 2020 election. I'm not sure it's resonating quite as much right now. Sort of the dynamic is a little bit different with the president being a Democrat. But everything you said is absolutely right. And as you know, the support for the government is stronger and federal agencies than people realize among the public. Most of the public supports most of what the federal government does, at least when they do it well. But support for the Postal Service is through the roof. And it's in significant part because of what you said. It may be that a lot of the sort of elite opinion makers themselves don't personally rely as much on the Postal Service and the post offices around the country as regular people do. But across the country, that's lived experience. And you see numbers for the Postal Service of support and strong support in the 80s and even venturing toward 90% support. No one wants the Postal Service cut back. No one wants to pay more for stamps. No one wants the services cut down. No one wants to see it take longer for mail or packages to get to them. And so the people who jump on this issue, I think, really find it works. Now, as a political issue, because the Democrats have started failing so badly in rural areas, in many cases, they're just not really there to make these effective arguments. But where you have states that are rural, you see senators from Vermont to the Dakotas to Montana and so on, really talking up this issue and aggressively trying to defend the Postal Service. We'd absolutely need more of it, though.
We have this paradox, however, where DeJoy is undermining the system as we speak, delaying first-class mail arrivals, producing a lot of complaints by people about the Postal Service, which isn't inherent in the Postal Service, which historically has had a great reputation for reliability, but it's due to DeJoy. He's playing the Republican game. You undermine public services as a reason to argue for corporatizing them. What do you say?
Yeah, I think it may be the most extreme example ever. And it's that consequence flows in two ways. One is, okay, the case starts to be made, well, the Postal Service isn't very good. Let's figure out ways that we progressively privatize it. But the other thing that happens is, there are in fact competitors for a lot of the things that people would use the Postal Service for. And they have, not partly by performance and partly by advertising, they've got pretty good reputations. So if you've got a package, you're going to rely on the Postal Service, you're going to rely on UPS or FedEx. People increasingly are going to rely on the private services, particularly as, in fact, the Postal Service performance declines. Like, there's just no reason for that, as you say. No one can match what the Postal Service has, not just in terms of those tens of thousands of post offices around the country, but there's a postal person coming to your house every day, every house. That's incomparable. And obviously, you can't snap your fingers and turn that into the magic that it obviously is. On the other hand, it's not impossible. And there's no reason at all that private competitors should be superior to the Postal Service in doing any of the delivery functions, let alone, even before we start talking about some of the new areas the Postal Service could get into and outcompete private businesses. The idea that the private corporations are more efficient than government service is a complete lie. And where it turns out to be true, it's only because the corporations have typically sabotage what the government agencies are able to do.
Well, listeners who want to contact the White House and tell Joe Biden to appoint 2 sterling new members of the Postal Service's Board of Governors, which can then tip the balance and get a majority to fire Louis DeJoy, just call the White House Opinion Center or email the White House. They want to be able to say that they got a pulse from the public about this, and it's not just an inside Washington nominee game. In conclusion, Robert, how do people get in touch with your coalition And what kind of information can they get from the website?
Well, they can check us out at citizen.org and just look for information on the Postal Service. And there's tons. I mean, I think the other 80 organizations and the Save the Post Office Coalition, we laid out the case on DeJoy pretty succinctly, but I think fulsomely too. So if people want to get up to speed, it's easy to find that material and take action. But I do want to say also to that point about taking action off, it's always true, but this is one in particular where this is available for the Biden administration to solve. And all they need, there's no reason in the world for them not to do it. They have been slow on it. So if we mount just a reasonable amount of political pressure, I'm quite optimistic they'll do it. So this is a case where, calling the White House, calling a member of Congress, sending that email, it is going to make a difference if enough of us do it.
And to get the names of the groups in your coalition, see if our listeners belong to them, where do they get the list?
They can find this most recent letter from the Save the Post Office Coalition at takeonwallstreet.com, which is actually takeonwallst.com, and you'll get all the information on the Save the Post Office Coalition.
There you are, listeners. A little energy here, and we can get the DeJoy forces off the backs of the Postal Service and its workers. We've been talking with Robert Weissman, civic advocate, public interest lawyer, president of Public Citizen, and leading the vanguard to resign Postmaster General Louis DeJoy and let the Postal Service thrive and grow and respond to its historical mission. Thank you, Robert.
It's great to be with you guys. Thanks, Ralph. Thanks, Steve and David.
That's our show. I want to thank our guests again, Dr. Susan Lin and Robert Weissman. For those of you listening on the radio, we're going to cut out now. But for you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap Up.
Subscribe to us on our Ralph Nader Radio Hour YouTube channel. And for Ralph's weekly column, it's free. Go to nader.org. For more from Russell Mokhiber, go to corporatecrimereporter.com.
The American Museum of Tort Law has gone virtual. Go to tortmuseum.org to explore the exhibits, take a virtual tour, and learn about iconic tort cases from history. And be sure to check out their online gift shop. You'll find books, posters, and flaming Pinto magnets and mugs for all the tort fans in your life. That's at store.tortmuseum.org.
To order your copy of the Capitol Hill Citizen, Democracy Dies in Broad Daylight, go to capitolhillcitizen.com.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kep Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon. Our associate producer is Hannah Feldman. Our social media manager is Stephen Wendt.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, everybody. Go to inspiringtweens.com in order to see how family conversations can be elevated on 54 gripping topics.
Hi, this is Jimmy Leewert, producer of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, and welcome to the Wrap-Up, where we continue our conversation with Dr. Susan Lin.
Tell us, do you think we're a society in serious decay? How would you describe 2022 society? And by the way, as you know so well, it's transcultural. It doesn't matter. These kids get hooked in Sri Lanka, Alaska, Tasmania, China, the U.S., Mexico, Uganda. It doesn't matter. The corporations are so centrally expert that they tap the most basic physical weaknesses and vulnerabilities of children. My sister uses the phrase, if you have low expectations of children, they'll oblige you. If you have high expectations, they'll surprise you. The corporations are trafficking in that former arena with temptation, seduction, and addiction.
Yes. And I'm reading your sister's book, and I think it's great that she targeted it to preteens because they are at an age where they can be idealistic and they're not dealing so much with the pressures of adolescence, and their brains are more, developed than preschoolers. So I thought that was really great.
They have such an innate curiosity and intelligence and practical idealism,
Yes.
They've gotten a lot of their parents to stop smoking or wear seatbelts when no one else succeeded. Right. So they have a moral authority we should tap into. What do you think is the importance of family conversations as the startup of all this, changing the level and range and content of family conversations?
Okay, wow, that's a complicated question. So first of all, I think that it's important for families and parents from the beginning of children's lives to establish the habit of conversation and of talking. From the time that children are really little. And that's another problem of, for instance, putting babies in front of screens, claiming to teach language when the research shows that babies can't learn language from machines, that they learn language in relation with other human beings, and preferably human beings, who love them. So family conversations are important, not just about, the issues that you and I are talking about today, but about everything. And if possible, family dinners are really helpful. Put all the screens away, put your devices away and have conversations. Sit down, when you eat together, to help your kids get in the habit of talking and working things out, with language. I think that's so important. And again, it's a class issue. And I have a whole chapter on advice for parents, stating that I believe this is a societal issue. It needs to be fixed by society. But meanwhile, social change, as you know, takes time. It takes so much time, and families need help now. That's why I have that chapter. But I also recognize that the advice I'm giving is so much easier if families are supported, if parents are supported, if they're not horribly stressed, if, as I said earlier, they're not working serial jobs. So again, the families that are more stressed are being made even more stressed by the combination of seductive technology and unregulated corporations. And the other thing is that corporations are so good at picking up the chinks in society and exploiting them. I went to a marketing conference where the keynote was about how to market to millennial families. Millennial families are more financially strapped, I think, than any other age group. At least this was pre-pandemic. That was the case. But that never came up. What came up is, what's great about millennial families is that they think that their kids are their best friends. I don't know if that's really true or not. And so, market to the kids. That was basically the example. And so they're just so good at taking societal vulnerabilities, human vulnerabilities, and exploiting them.
I mean, I think really we have to raise the emotional intelligence behind all of this. Don't you think, as a psychologist, Susan?
Yes, I do. I think that's really important. And I also, for activists and young people who want to be activists and who want to make change, I think one thing that's really important is stamina. It takes a long time. Social change, it doesn't come from the top down, it comes from the bottom up.
Sometimes, especially in a modern technological age, it can be much faster. Of course, the corporations show how fads can spread like lightning, over some product. And we have to show that serious family conversations that are very enlightening, exciting, they elevate the child's sense of curiosity and fulfill their practical idealism about, why don't you abolish poverty? Why don't you deal with the climate? You know how to do it, adults. We're just children. You're not protecting us. It can become very exciting, and it could spread very, very rapidly. So I know what you're saying when you say things take a long time, because it has. Look how long it took just to get Harry Truman's universal health insurance established. It hasn't been established yet, 70 years or so later.
Right.
But I think we don't have time for the usual decades-long procrastination, obstruction of corporations who know how to spread a reform movement out and thin it out until they know how to game it and block it, which is what happened to Truman's universal health insurance proposal. We have to call them for what they are. We haven't even touched on the more vicious part of the abduction of these children into the internet, the violence, the two-way involvement in product selling and product buying that harms seriously their health and safety, their body and their mind, how they expose them to pornography. They don't police the internet to protect the children of this country, as they keep bragging they do, but we know they're lying.
Yes, they're lying. And it's even eating disorders and promoting envy. Instagram, I was talking to a young woman yesterday who said when she was a teenager and was doing Instagram, she spent a lot of time taking pictures of herself over and over and over again to try to get just the right picture to put on Instagram. And so on social media, basically what we're being trained to do is market ourselves. It's all curated and it just promotes envy. I mean, it looks like everybody on Instagram or Facebook is having better meals than you're having or is more beautiful. The pictures can be altered and are altered. So nobody's really looking like themselves and everybody is looking so much better. And that kind of, fomenting that kind of envy and encouraging girls to compare themselves constantly, not just to models, but to their peers and their peers' altered images is so cruel. It's just really cruel.
Which leads me to say, listeners, that this conversation we're having with Susan Lin is basically an understatement of how bad the situation is.
And that's a wrap. Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour when we welcome the head of Consumer Reports, Martha Tadeo. Until next time.
Stand up, you've been sitting way